Although there were many fortune tellers in New Orleans, Madame L'Orange was the undisputed best. She was in such high demand that the locals refused to speak of their experience with her, as to ensure that visitors from out of town would never come to her. In order to get a reading by Madame L'Orange, one must not only seek her out, but they must also be willing to pay the high price that she demanded. Her name was whispered from local to local, but Madame L'Orange was so elusive that no one, out of a feeling of obsessive devotion to her, would ever state where they found the magic woman who predicted their future. To find her, one had to follow the markings that she left around town. If one was in touch with the spiritual realm, then they would find traces of her magic throughout the city. Most who believed in her power claimed that they could feel her presence like a delicious nectar hanging in the air. Some even believed that all magic in the city must answer to her, and that only the emporiums that she touched could be classified as holding any real power at all, and that the others were mere tourist attractions. If a local thought that they had found Madame L'Orange's divination shop, then they were expected to follow the energy to the place where she lurked within its shadows. If one were lucky enough to find her, she was believed to peer into the depths of their mind, to be able to predict exactly how much money they had on their person and how much they could part with at that moment from the batch. All transactions were cash only, and everyone knew that they had to pay up front, or else they'd be cursed with a worse fortune than they would have had if they had never sought her out. But of course, they all always had money, and they always brought a handsome amount in hopes that offering more would create something bigger for themselves. Any skeptic would assume that offering her so much cash in this manner before she even read the fortune was a money grabbing scheme, but no one who knew a Madame L'Orange and her powers was a skeptic. Every person who had the fortune of stumbling into the realm of Madame L'Orange always had their fortune come true. She always invited in her customers with a warm, inviting smile as she had them enter into her incense perfumed room and take a seat at her tonkatsu table, equipped with a fortune ball in the center, tarot cards, tea leaves, oracle cards, crystals, and runes. She would brew a batch of her specialty tea for the clients after they paid, and would get to know them as they drank deeply from the cup. Once the tea was consumed, Madame L'Orange could make even the most apprehensive and nervous guest feel at ease as they dropped into a trance-like state. Once in that state, Madame Larange would grab their cup and she would begin reading the tea leaves. She was well versed in the symbols, more so than anybody else, and she would tell them her own interpretations. If ever challenged, she would look at them with a sympathetic eye and tell them to look deeper than what they thought that they knew. For Madame Larange assured them that she was their ultimate guide, and while they were in that state, anything that she said they believed. Plus, who would ever challenge and think that they knew more than the great Madame Larange? They would leave with a fortune in mind, and they would go home and they would find that whatever it was that she had said, no matter how far-fetched, whether it was immediate, a few months from then, or even a year out, the predictions always came true. Of course, what they refused to acknowledge and what they could not see was that Madame Larange was not what she seemed. They thought her a fortune teller, and a good one at that, but no one ever expected that she had a hand in the fortunes. The people would come in and they would talk to her as they drank their tea, and they became relaxed from the incense of the room and her natural ability to make anybody around her feel at ease. They spilled their guts to her, and she was able to predict what it was that they wanted. For people have a tendency to reveal what is the most important thing to them at the beginning of every conversation. It can be disguised as an intent to get to know the other person, but most of the time, these people would feel so comfortable around Madame Larange that they would tell her everything that she ever needed to know about them on the spot. It was easy for her to manipulate her clients. It was easy to get them to talk, and it was easy to understand what could possibly happen next as soon as they left the shop. She knew if somebody was a determined type, if they would leave the door immediately to go and make it true. She knew if it would take them a little bit to get their affairs in order. And she knew that inevitably, if the person was not someone to take action, that something would fall through with or without their guidance. Of course, she couldn't just rely on the people, however. Her reputation was much better than that. She was not a mere mentalist, but she was a witch as well. She would check in on her clients by hiding in the streets. She knew what they were doing, and her customers, no matter how little they spoke to one another, or at least claimed that they did, her customers all knew each other, and their lives impacted one another's. If she talked to somebody who wanted to get married, and then she would tell the person's partner that they saw wedding bells and their future a year out. If the person did not propose, Madame Larange was not going to let that ruin her reputation. She would slip a love potion into the guy's drink the next time that he came in, making him feel so enamored with his girlfriend that he would propose. And she would do little things like that to make the fates reflect what she had read. If a client was particularly rude. One of her favorite things to do, and perhaps one of the skills that she was best at, was the art of the curse. She would tell the person that they were fated to have something terrible happen to them. And depending on how she was feeling that day, it could be something minor, from just tripping and falling and scraping their knee, to having something absolutely wicked happen to them. Some terrible clients had lost limbs. Some suffered from heart attacks. Others were tortured by demons in their sleep until they were eventually driven mad. She had the power to kill. But what would be the fun in that?